Episode 1 of Rugged Wisdom, TJ Johnson, former Cincinnati Bengals, South Carolina Gamecock. He's awesome. I think the interview's awesome. Thank you so much here for listening to Rugged Wisdom.
Welcome to the Rugged Wisdom Podcast, hosted by myself, Scott Johnson, and my buddy, Joe Wedra. Join us each week as we discuss timeless truths, share great stories, and create momentum in our daily lives. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and share wherever you enjoy this podcast. We greatly appreciate it. And now, let's get on with the show.
Welcome back into Rugged Wisdom. Joe Wedra, Scott Johnson, and we're back talking. And we're excited to talk today.
It's going to be a good day.
We got to talk to you, Scott.
Yeah, it's going to be a good day. On the, as we said in the intro, my man TJ Johnson is with us today. And glad to have you, man.
Thank you for having me.
Man, dude, we're glad to have you. So we're going to get into some big, maybe some heavier stuff, but I want to talk shop first. Let's talk football. I want to talk about that. I'm sure that's what most people want to talk about. Started at Aner High School and then moved your way up to the University of South Carolina.
Yeah.
Right? One of the USC.
The USC.
the USC, I guess. Yeah, the USC. I want to talk about that. Let's talk about your time at USC because as a Clemson guy, let me just start with this.
Disclaimer.
Okay? Disclaimer. We're friends. But technically, the only player in South Carolina history to start and defeat Clemson in your whole career.
Yeah, 4 times in a row.
Four times in a row,
I
right?
think after my class, the following class, there was because I think Connor Shaw was part of that class who defeated them 4 times in a row also.
Yeah.
Because there was a 5-year streak, so the
Right,
guys that
yeah.
came after me also.
The thumb.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The first, though.
The first, yeah, there we go. So anyway, we'll get that out of the way.
Yeah.
We'll go ahead and get that out of the way. But that's but not only that. Now Joe and I were talking about just the resiliency of your career at USC, and so there's some you hold some records there as far as like starts, right?
Yeah.
Tell me about that. What are that's kind of when I look at your stat sheet, that's something that sticks out to me as your start record.
Yeah, I think, to be honest with you, I about forgot what the number, I think it was 53 consecutive starts, I think is what it was. So
Yeah.
I was very fortunate that I had no injuries, you know what I'm saying,
Yeah.
that I could do that. But that's something I'm pretty proud of, that I was able to play those games.
I think you should be proud of that for sure.
53 starts. So I was thinking about this. Like, you say no injuries, but you're inevitably playing a little banged up. I mean,
Yeah. You play the game of football.
Those Iron Man
You're
streaks.
never 100%.
Right. So, I mean, there's something to those, like, Iron Man
Yeah.
streaks. We think about it. We just think,
Oh, yeah.
consecutive. He was healthy. I guarantee you weren't healthy every single one of those games. So, I mean, that to me is another element. I'm like,
Oh, yeah.
shoot, that's pretty cool.
Yeah, and I mean it's like you say, as soon as the spring training starts, getting ready to go into the season, you're not 100% until you heal up after the season from there. Truthfully,
I don't want to bring up the Clemson thing again, but one more time, that's got to be a little different, right? Those wins. I mean, when you're there on the field after the game.
and it's something that because of the in-state rivalry, it's something that resonates with the people in the state. You know what I mean? It's just
Sure.
it's something that they're very proud of.
Oh yeah, yeah. Well, it's those games, they do mean something different, right?
Yeah,
They mean something in state. Whether it's the great rivalries of sports, they just do mean something different. And two, I mean, there's a lot of what people and you probably can speak to this. These are guys that a lot of when you got in state, went to high school together, you played against each other in high school, you saw each other, at all levels of the game, kind of getting to there. So there's a lot of pride in that rivalry.
Yeah, there's no doubt there's a lot of pride. And it's like you say, I mean, these are guys that I played in the Shrine Bowl, so I met guys that played for Clemson,
Sure.
Carolina. I also played with guys that went to Georgia,
Yeah.
Florida, all over. So it's it's really unique even now. There's not too many games, both football or NFL, that I can't cut the TV on and see somebody on the sidelines that I connected with somewhere down the journey.
Yeah.
So that's always been kind of interesting.
Yeah, that's cool. Well, let's talk about that. So you got drafted out of the University of South Carolina. You got drafted to the Cincinnati Bengals, right?
I did.
So let's talk about what is that like? What's that process? Because I mean, most guys who watch this, that's kind of something they're leaning in. They're like, man, what is it like? I mean, what is that? What is that like it's one thing to play at college level. What was it like to go through that whole draft situation?
The draft is a very interesting process.
Wait, did you go to the Spandex Olympics?
Oh, absolutely.
You went to the Spandex.
Yeah, and I mean, it is it's a cattle call. I mean, it's spandex walking through. Hey, can you bend this way? Hey, let me measure to see how far your pinky is from your thumb.
Yeah.
I mean, it's the whole deal.
Yeah.
And then they want to test IQ. I don't know if this is. It's probably not a proper story to share for you.
That's all right. Well, okay. We'll skip it. We might put it in there. We might pick that up in the after show.
Well, I'll say that. I mean, it's not a bad story, but one of the most surprising things about the combine, like, those coaches sit down with you, and you know, they're trying to figure out how you think, how you operate. So I'll never forget, and I'm not going to say the team, but I sat down with the coach, and the first question he asked me is this. He says, TJ, says, I know that you're from the South. I know you love to hunt and fish. How do you feel about your black teammates? Wow. That's the first question that I pretty much got asked. How do you feel about your black team? The same way I do about my white, brown, yellow, or purple teammates. You know,
the word's teammate.
What kind of
the operative word there is teammate.
But I mean, there's an element in which, you know, they're trying to put you in somewhat of a stressful environment to see how you react.
No, I get that. It's a little bit of stress testing just to kind of want to see how people are going to respond to adversity and some of that mental adversity. So went to the combine. Right, as far as that. So got drafted. Walk that through. Like, so how did you wind up at Cincinnati? Was there other places you thought you were going to go? How did that look?
Yeah, so you go off to do the combine training. Mm-hmm. So that was a period of time where I went to Atlanta, and then, you know, I had an agent. Through that period, I'd kind of determined who was going to be my agent, and I actually the agent that I went with. Was actually Reggie White's agent. I don't know if you guys remember him,
sure.
but that was a big part. I mean, Reggie White was a devout Christian, and you know what I'm saying. So I went with that, and then after the combine, you know, you kind of still hear from coaches. They're talking to you, and I remember I was kind of nervous going into the combine. You know, you just don't know what's going to happen. But there were a few teams. I remember Dallas and Green Bay had reached out. Really the day of the draft and pretty much said, hey, today's the day, and it didn't happen. You know what I'm saying? And then but
you were mentally preparing to go to either of those places.
Yeah,
right?
Well, and then when that didn't happen, you know, you kind of start to think about, because I was drafted in the 7th round, so it's like you know, you're starting that's the last round, so it's like, what's going to happen? So I remember I went. We had a little deal at my in-laws' house. And my wife and I were just dating at the time, but I remember I isolated myself because it's getting to the final round. I went into my truck, and so I'm sitting out there, and my daddy comes out there, and we're just sitting there talking. And I remember having a conversation with my dad, like, I don't know what I'm gonna do, because I mean, I had a degree in sports and entertainment management, and so that's not something I'm gonna do. So I'm like, I don't know what I'm gonna do. But I'll never forget, I got the phone call from Marvin Lewis, which was really special because I'm sitting there with my dad, you know, and it's just kind of like a skinny the teeth kind of deal. Like, hey, you know, you're coming to Cincinnati.
Dude, I love that. I mean, people over dramatize the draft because I mean, what you see the house party and the stuff. You see the first round, the second round, that kind of stuff. But dude, that's what I love about your story is like, I'm in my truck talking to my dad. Yeah. And I get a call from
Marvin Lewis starts a call.
Yeah, I mean, dude, I love the organic nature.
So the story's actually pretty interesting too, because I got to finish that story out. As a child, right, I was one of those husky size kids, right? You know, going to Bugle Boy buying the husky size
Outlet 3, Mall 3.
So I remember the first time I was in church. And I'm going somewhere with this, but I remember hearing a preacher preaching on fasting, right?
Yeah.
I had no idea what it was, but to me it was just, let's skip a meal and pray about something that's really important to me.
Yeah.
I literally remember as a child, the next day for lunch, I skipped lunch, I shut my door, and I prayed. And it was the most important thing at the time. God, let me make it to the pros in football.
Yeah. How old were you at this time when you prayed that prayer?
Man, I was probably, I don't know, 10, 11.
10, 11. Okay, so you pray a prayer at 10, 11.
So fast forward, sitting in the truck with my dad, thinking, you know, you're right there on the brink, but not making it. I mean, after I got that phone call, obviously I was just so overwhelmed with joy. But it was in that moment I was like, man, I remembered that prayer. It's just like it was one of those really cool moments, man.
Dude, that is
the full circle kind of thing.
Yeah.
that is awesome.
I think that's amazing. The whole draft, we talked about that a little bit, but I mean, last question I have with that is this the era where? Because what year were you drafted? 2013.
Yeah, I think so.
Roughly
I've been
around
hitting the head a lot since then, so I'm trying to remember.
So was this kind of the area? Because nowadays we have mock drafts, right? Where it's like a full 7 round. This is where each guy's going to go. Was that leading up to the draft? Did you have these media outlets, if you want to call them that, projecting, hey, this is where TJ's going to go, or was it really kind of?
Yeah, and I mean that's always certainly it has been built up and built up and built up and built up. Now, I mean, now you can place bets on that. You know, they've got this whole thing.
Sure.
So it wasn't quite to that extreme, but yeah, there were certainly mock drafts, and I mean even the same guys, you know, Mel Kiper, Todd McShay, they were still doing the same stuff they're doing now. It just wasn't as big as it is now.
Yeah. Now, when you got to Cincinnati, who were some of the, was Chad Johnson had left the year before you?
Chad
he
was
left.
gone.
Yeah, so he left. So who was in that draft class? Like when you show up, like who are, you know, when you show up for work, who are the guys that, you know, hey, when you walk into the office to the locker room the first day, like who are the guys you see?
Yeah, well, so the guys on the team, and we had a really, especially my rookie year, we had a really good team. But it would have been like Andy Dalton was quarterback, Carlos Dunlap, that's a North Charleston guy. Actually, Clifton Gathers was there too from Carver's Bay.
Yeah, I know. His dad or Jumpy?
Yeah,
right. So Uncle Jumpy.
Uncle Jumpy, who was also on the team.
Yeah.
So you had and I'm trying to remember. No, Jumpy and Clifton are brothers.
Yes.
And then there's a uncle. It's like a whole
they call
family
him
lineage.
Blueprint. I used to work out with him in Georgetown. Blueprint.
And then there was a younger one
he
too.
He played for the Bills.
And then there was a younger one too that I actually played against. He went to Georgia. It was Kwame.
Yeah.
So I mean, it's like a whole family lineage there.
Yeah.
AJ Green was there from Georgia.
Stud.
Yeah. Geno Atkins.
Oh yeah.
So I mean, there was some.
That's a great team.
Yeah. Some big time
that
players.
was a great team, dude. So we're talking about your time in the NFL. What was your size and your weight? This is something that I know you and I've talked about this before another time, but 6'6", coming out of 3.
It's 6'5".
6'5", and you're at 3 what?
Let's see. I played in college. My heaviest was about 332.
332.
But then when I entered the draft, I was about 310, I think, somewhere around there at the combine.
Is that because just the workouts, like leading into the combine?
It's because I was fat. And to be honest with you, it's just it's a difference in mentality between college and NFL. You know, certain programs, hey, bigger's better.
Right.
But the reality is, the better you can move with the weight, the better you're going to be. Yeah, so it's kind of a different philosophy, I guess.
How advanced was nutrition when you're going through the process? Because nowadays everything gets tracked, right? Well, that's the big thing with these college guys is nutrition's so big. Was that an emphasis when you were in college, or was that just kind of, hey man, let's eat? And
well, it was kind of both. I went through a few different strength coaches, and so which would kind of encompass nutrition and everything else. And we had different nutritionists and different things too. Everybody's kind of got a different philosophy, just like you get in everything else in the world. When I first got there, I think I came into Carolina at 285, and man, they had me eating like 12,000 calories a day.
So you put 50 pounds on.
Oh, quick. But like the thing was, hey, they didn't care if I got it from Little Caesars Pizza or Taco Bell. You know, just get your 12,000 calories.
12,000 calories.
It was miserable. I mean, I would finish a workout.
That's insane, dude.
I would finish a workout and have 4 protein shakes that I had to drink, that they would watch me drink.
Yeah.
Wow. I mean, it was miserable.
Yeah.
Like you think, oh, eat whatever you want. No, it's miserable.
Yeah.
It's miserable. But then, you know, we ended up getting some different strength coaches and people who I would argue kind of knew what they were doing, and that whole mentality changed.
So when you say the head ball coach didn't know what he was doing,
now, I didn't say the head ball coach.
yeah,
don't set me up like that.
Okay, I ain't gonna set you up. That's just me, man. But that is interesting. I think that's what a lot of guys want to know is like, well, what's the process like? What is it like? Kind of the behind the scenes, and part of that is just like, man, like the weight, the eating, the food, the calories, all that's a lot. The hidden side. People don't see that. There's I would say that probably like a lot of industries, what people see on Sunday is, would you say 10% of all, or like of all that goes into it? It's like
you know what else is really interesting to me about just the way the media blows stuff up, and this is truth. Some of the best players in the NFL are guys you have no idea their name.
Correct.
And so you get guys who are marketable or charitable or well-spoken or whatever, and the media can put them in a light to where they seem like they're this much better than the rest of these guys, when really there's some cats in these are some of the guys I'm worried about, not this guy.
Does that cause animosity on the among the man, look, this guy's not that good, but look, he's a media darling. Does that cause animosity?
I don't think. Not like you get in that locker room and you really don't care. I mean, it's not something you think about. You worried about who you got to go against that week. I mean, you know what I'm saying? Because that's my focus is on this guy that I got to go against. Yeah. And I know.
Well, who's that guy? When your career, like, who was the guy? You're like, man. You look at the schedule. You look at week 5. And you're like, oh, here we go.
There was a bunch of them, and it changed every year. I mean, there and every player has their own strengths and weaknesses, right? Sure. So like me. I was always very strong. You see what I'm saying? Like that you're not going to run me over.
Right.
So the guys that were 360, the bigger guys, I'm not worried about that. But you get the guy that can move, he's a little different from me because TJ's not the best with his bending and hips.
Now, you were center at Carolina. But when you went to the Bengals, you moved around because now you were the line captain, you were a team captain at USC, but you didn't just play center, right? So when you got to Bengals, they moved you around a little bit.
Yeah. So at Carolina, my freshman year, I played at guard.
Okay.
And then from there, they moved me to center. And then when I got to the league, it was kind of all 3 interior positions.
Okay.
So I played in different games at different spots.
So I asked that question just to kind of put people mentally like where you are on the field. So who was the DL that you thought, man, I got to see this guy this week, and who was the defensive lineman that you circled that date going like, I got to prep for that guy?
That's a good question, man, because it's hard to isolate just one of them. Yeah. Every team has that guy. You see what I'm saying? It's not like,
it's
hey,
the NFL.
Yeah, it's not like, hey, I gotta worry about just one guy this season. It's every week.
Well, then let me ask the question a different way. What defensive scheme did you not like to see? Like a 3-4, the 4 front, a nickel. Like, what is it that you're like, man, I hate when they do that?
Yeah, again, it's more of a personnel thing. So like for me, just in playing that game, it's like the ground and pound football, that's right up my alley.
Yeah.
But the guys who are just exotic, and you get some stuff, especially with some of these defensive coordinators. I mean, they'll have like D linemen wearing a jersey number 6, and then he's standing up back where the linebackers are, and so like when you come up to the line as a center, you have to know personnel.
Yeah.
Because that determines how you'll block it.
Right.
So when you come up, it's the stuff that's disguised where they're just kind of standing around, and because it's not like typical Little League football. Everybody comes up and puts your hand on the ground, right? I mean, you're coming up to the line. Yeah. I'm making a call, and by the time I'm done making that call, they've changed over here. Yeah. You see what I'm saying? It's a mind game.
Relatively recent, though. It's interesting how the NFL, not to make this a football show, but it's interesting how that idea of versatile, skilled, really athletic, I mean, that's not just for corners anymore. That's not just for safeties. You got these defensive interior, they're athletes, freak athletes.
Yeah, and it's interesting, like AFC North football, so you've got, Cleveland, you've got Cincinnati, Pittsburgh, Baltimore, right? Those schematically are very similar. You know what I'm saying? But then you would go and you would play somebody like Houston, and their stuff is just all over the place. So you would face literally a little bit of everything on any given Sunday, and even with that, most people think you get a playbook, right? And so you've got there's one way to run a play. you got to know your rules for each play. Because if you know the rules, you know how to block it no matter what. Because every play has rules. And every team, I mean, there's literally 100 different defenses or 100 different ways they could line up. So it's you've got to know rules. You can't just memorize, hey, I've got that guy.
Right. Yeah. I think that's what's so interesting. I know when I watch football, my wife, she makes a comment all the time. She's like, I just see 22 people just running around. I'm like, every specific player there, you literally could spend in every play 5 minutes breaking down every 22 guys on the field, going like, well, this is what they could do, this is what they should do, this is the thought process. I mean, it's like a chess match.
Well, and even now, it's hard for me to just watch a game.
Yeah.
You know, as a center, it's hard for me to just watch a game like most people do and just follow the ball because, you know, I'm going through kind of progressions that I would have made.
Right.
What personnel is it? Where's the safeties? Are they high? Are they rolled? You know what I'm saying? That's how I'm looking at it on the film.
Right. I'm just curious, and now we'll move on to some other stuff. I'm gonna put you back at center, and let's say you're making some calls, right, for the offensive line. How deep into the defense are you looking? You looking at the line, into the linebackers? Are you accounting for secondary? Like, how deep into it when you're making calls are you looking?
Yeah. So, and again, there's different schemes for all this, and some teams put the calls on the center, some put it on the quarterback, right? I mean, if you've got Brady,
sure,
right, he's going to make the
gonna
call.
make a call.
Yeah, hey, look, here's your mic.
Yeah.
Okay,
right.
but a lot most teams don't necessarily do that. Now the quarterback can override, but basically the way it kind of works is the center makes a point.
Right.
Everybody counts. I'm sorry, I hit you, but everybody counts off of that point.
Okay.
And so then, as the game progresses, right, defenses start keying in on that point. So then there's dummy points. So if I point to this guy, I really mean this guy.
Okay.
All right. So even after I do that, I've got our ID. Well, then let's say safeties are up top and they start rolling. Well, they only roll if they're going to cheat and a blitz is coming from this way.
Right.
Well, say I've ID'd this guy, but I know it's coming from this guy. Then I re-ID to this guy over here. It's a lot. It's a progression.
Yeah,
it gets better too. There's sometimes you'll come to the line of scrimmage. Right, you hear. I mean, obviously everybody knows like Manning and those guys.
Yeah.
Can. Okay, well, let's talk about that for a second. There's 2 plays called, so you will have one play, and then there's a secondary play depending on what they line up in. So can means you trash can the first play, and we're running the second.
Yeah.
So you got to have both ID'd in your head coming up to the line.
How many times you would be on the sideline? Is it Omaha?
Yeah.
That's his word. But yeah, I mean, obviously just making a call, making adjustments. And I love that you bring that depth to the conversation because I want people to at least recognize or to remind themselves that football is a highly intellectual game in a way, that there's a lot of things going on in a very short amount of time.
Yeah.
Right?
Except for D lineman, man, it's see ball, get ball.
Exactly. Just
go.
Go.
Every
Go.
position is a little, even on the offensive line. I mean, I'm a very analytical thinker, right? So if I were to characterize the offensive lineman, your tackle is your athlete. He's your best athlete.
Right. Yeah.
Your guard is your brawler. I mean, he's your fighter. Your center's your thinker. And I mean, that's kind of the way the way you break it down.
I get it. I love it. Well, obviously this is not just a football show. That's not what we brought
Sports
you
Center.
in. But Sports Center, yeah. But go Sports Ball. But I mean that's because it's such a platform, right? And so the NFL has been a platform, or let me just say football has been a platform. And I say football because I remember we did a youth event. I forget what it was called. I think I was playing music. I think you spoke. I played music. I think you were at USC at the time, or
Is that Rehoboth?
yeah. I think there was some other players that were there. He had on white shoes. I remember that. I can remember he had on some high stepping white gator shoes, man, like Ric Flair shoes. Pointed toes too.
I have no doubt.
Yes, and I won't name him, but he had on some high stepping Ric Flair gator shoes, man. But football has been a platform for you to share your faith and what God has done in your life and what God's doing in your life. And so, I mean, that's what we want to talk about and what we want people to walk away with is like, man, how have you been able to use the game to build the kingdom? Is that a fair question?
Oh yeah, it's a very fair question. I mean, obviously, football, especially being able to play at the next level, has opened up a lot of doors in which people will listen. I mean, they'll come to hear somebody who played in the NFL, not necessarily because they want to hear about Jesus, but it's kind of neat that somebody play. Just like the conversation we just had. Yeah. You know, some people have never heard that kind of stuff. So because of that, it's an opportunity to open up and tell people about Christ.
Yeah.
And so it's always been that opportunity. I was able to do it in college. Now, granted, that time that we were at Rehoboth and I spoke, I was horrible. I mean, I was terrible. That was like the first time I ever spoke, if I'm not mistaken. I was bad, Scott. I mean, bad. And so
you want to break it down?
Huh?
Like you want to break it down?
No,
like
you ain't got to go. No, we ain't got. No, I don't.
Study?
I don't.
Yeah.
I'm well aware of how bad it was.
Okay.
I mean, I froze. But I've always had a huge fear of public speaking.
Okay.
I mean, always. And that first time didn't help because I remember standing up there and totally forgot what I was going to say. And then I got to college, and as a captain, Spurrier had asked me to address the team a couple of times. Twice, I remember it was spur of the moment, and I did fine. And that third time, I did the same thing. I stood in front of people, and I froze.
Yeah.
And so I'd always had that fear, but it's just kind of interesting how God uses the things in which we're weak in to I mean, I have to lean on Him whenever I do it now. And I'm so grateful for that weakness because I can't speak without Him. It's just, it's still my biggest fear is I'm preaching now.
So there's this really good article. We talked about this before in the Post and Courier. It was a couple of years ago. They did a feature on you, and that actually the story is kind of their lead talking about when coach calls you up. But there's this great quote, and I think it really sets up the personality, especially when you're going through college. And it's talking about who you were in college, and it's saying, "I'd rather be in the living room reading a systematic theology book for fun." Like that just is a perfect. When I read that, it was before I'd met you, and I was like, "All right, this is cool." I mean, when you're going through college like that. Almost, would you say you were a little different than everybody else in all the good ways? But I mean, that's not a quote you hear from the majority.
Yeah, well,
of
that quote was from actually, it was a time after I'd retired from the NFL. I had really gotten. I mean, I've always loved theology. It's just something, biblical theology, systematic theology. It's something that I eat up. And I remember I was sitting there. I would read. I mean, I was reading like Millard Erickson, some of those just for fun. And the NFL had a program to pay for further education. Well, these are literally the textbooks that are taught in most seminaries. Right. So I said, well, why don't I go to seminary? It was not to preach. It was just because I enjoy that type of study. Mm-hmm. And so it's just kind of interesting, using that platform of the NFL. When my wife and I moved back home, it opened up a lot of doors to speak to people. And I still didn't feel called to preach, but I knew God was calling me to do something in the ministry. And so as I began to speak and it unfolded, we had a church that we were attending at the time who had kind of went through a split. And so it was from there that I got asked to fill the pulpit. And it just kind of took off from there. God had placed such a burden in my heart for a pastoral role that I would simply be unhappy doing anything else.
Why do you think they asked you to fill the pulpit? Like, was it like heir apparent? And I mean that in a good way. Like, hey, well, look, it just seems like this is the man for the moment. Or were you like, hey, man, hey, coach, put me in. Like, I see a need, or how? Like,
no, it's just
how did that transpire?
It was simply God's providence is how it transpired. My wife and I had we were living in Kentucky when I was playing in Cincinnati. Mm-hmm. And we had gotten involved in a church that was really functioning at a high level. And I mean, just done well. And I remember we found out we were having the twins. We knew we were going to move home. We need help with grandparents. So I remember I began praying like, God, where am I going to go back home, right? Little Aner. And be fed like this, and it's just crazy how prayer works, and that God began shaping my will to His will, and that prayer over time became, God, where can I go to be used?
Right.
You know, as opposed to, hey,
Yeah.
where can I go to be blessed? So
Sure.
we ended up joining the church. And again, it wasn't necessarily because it was the church in which we were just getting fed at. It's where God, I felt like, wanted me to go.
So to put a verbiage to that, I love that because I talk about this sometimes about moving from consumer to contributor. And when you make that shift, it seems like these doors open up, right?
Yeah.
And so you move like, God, where I don't want to just go somewhere and consume. Like, where can I contribute? You know, so keep going with that. I love that shift of mindset.
Yeah, and so it was there that I began to start teaching, you know, and from there, they were asking me to teach. I started teaching a foundations class, you know, kind of a new members type class,
Right.
just going over core stuff. And then the pastor started asking me to fill the pulpit some when he would be out. And so I'd kind of done that a few times. Well, that led up to about the moment that some nasty stuff happened and there was a split. And so because I was there, the people were familiar with me. It was kind of an easy transition. Again, it was completely God's providence.
That is awesome.
You talk about getting nervous talking in front of a team. First couple times preaching, what's that like?
Oh, it's terrifying. Yeah, I can play football in front of 100,000 people. It doesn't bother me at all. You put me in front of 3 people. Now, that's definitely gotten better with time.
Sure it does.
But I have a weird problem, too. Like, my brain thinks 2 or 3 places ahead of my mouth.
I get it.
So
it's definitely a skill that you get better at. It's something that I was someone one of our we hire a lot of young people by design at the church that I work at, and the guy asked me the other day, he was one of our production managers, and I was getting up to preach on a Thursday night, was kicking the weekend off, and he's like, you get nervous? And I was like, that's a great question, and the answer is yes. You always should be nervous, right? Yeah. Like if you're preaching, if you're trying to correctly handle the Word of God, that should at some level make you nervous.
Yeah,
100%, right?
There's a solemnness, a tremendous weight, a burden for faithfully and accurately dividing the Word of truth.
Yes.
And that will never go away, nor should it.
It seems like the shift is, I'm no longer afraid of people, but being obedient.
Yeah.
Right. And it seems like little shifts. And so I'm like, well, I don't know, man. Like with preaching, it's not that you're afraid of people. Like, okay, I just want to be found faithful.
Yeah.
And that is not a nervousness, but like a holy reverence, a respect in a way. And that's a
and then too, like you get passages like James 2, right? Mm-hmm. Or James 3, okay, right? That not many of you should be teachers. There's a greater judgment, right? Sure. You're held accountable for the words in which you're presenting to the people.
Yeah.
And so that's just something that I take very, very seriously. And even in terms of study and prep for God's Word, I want to do everything I can to faithfully and accurately exegete the passage and tell the people what's going on there.
Well, yeah. Go. I know you got questions. I got a question there too.
Well, I just think that's a really fascinating. Just sitting here listening to 2 people who faithfully preach the Word of God. As someone who does not, it's really, really interesting what both you just said. You use the word solemn. Almost as solemn. It's very, very interesting to think about that as somebody who is primarily a consumer of the Word. Really interesting. That just really struck me. And you talk about, it's almost this idea of reverence and solemnness, but can you expand on that a little bit? Because I think from my perspective, that just really hit me like, wow. I've never heard someone talk about handling the Scriptures and having to deliver. It's really interesting. I was just wondering if you can expand on that a little bit.
Yeah, for me, it was A.W. Tozer who said that really everything that you deal with in life, right, no matter what circumstance you're in, shapes from your view of who God is. Mm-hmm. You see what I'm saying? So how you view God shapes everything about your life. And when you recognize that there is a perfect and pure and holy and sovereign God, right, it shapes everything. And so for me, it is God has revealed himself to man through his Word, right? And so it is my responsibility as a pastor to do everything that I can to be as faithful. And I'm not one, even just in terms of the pulpit and stuff like that. Like I'm not saying that stories and different things aren't helpful in helping people connect the dots. Don't misunderstand me, because they are. But my goal is to stand in that pulpit and say, open your Bible and turn to whatever passage we're going to, because I don't want, my words are irrelevant. I want to say what God has revealed to us, because that is what the Bible is. It's God's revelation of himself to man.
Sure.
I'll get it back on track in a minute, but I want to ask your thought on that, because I think this is a really interesting, especially for people who are listening to this and just, I mean, it's amazing, this thought process. Can you expand a little bit on what he's talking about, maybe from your perspective of this idea of reverence and delivering a holy word from a holy God? It's really interesting.
Yeah. I understand the word solemn. And and people hear that, they might think like funeral solemn. That's not what it's a gravity. It's a gravitas. It's a gravity. It's a weight by which the essence that these aren't nursery rhymes. These aren't bedtime stories. This is the word of God that is a two-edged sword that it is by which shapes, like like you quote Tozer, that it is what you think about God is the most important thing in your life and your eternity. Right? That's the thing. So if you're going to help people shape their worldview, that's a weighty thing, right? It's not like, hey, well, here's something to think about. Like it's like it is. But to do that effectively and winsomely is the balance. Like that's hard. Like how can you do that effectively and winsomely? It is a beautiful burden. How about that? It's a beautiful burden. It's not a burden you shy from. It's like it's a privilege and it's a beautiful burden. I think that might be another way to say it.
This great weight of, because I think a lot of times you might listen to that and say, oh, that sounds brutal, like that weight that they must be carrying, but it must not be. It must be a beauty.
Well, so like having children, they give you a child at the hospital and they tell you to go home, and you're like, what? Like, there's a book for this, like a manual, like I gotta leave here with this thing? And you're like, my job is to keep this thing alive. Yeah. And then you're like, that's like the most scary thought in the world. Like, I gotta raise a human. But then as you're a parent, you're like, but this is the most beautiful task I've ever had in my life. It's one of the most important tasks as a human to raise a child, but it's also the most beautiful thing. Yeah. And so there's to quote a theologian, Paul Tillich calls these things a dialectical tension. That there's this dialectical tension between you won't resolve the conflict, you will manage it. You will manage the tension between the two. It is a beautiful opportunity, but it also is a heavy opportunity at the same time.
But, no, absolutely, it makes a lot of sense.
And in the day of social media, anybody can clip anything you say immediately, put it on repeat, and it's out there. I remember when I first started preaching 23 years ago, full time. At least 2000, there was no internet like we had now, and it's different. It's a different game now. Yeah, it's a different game now. So it's a different weight now, because not only like the congregation here, like, man, that's on the internet, like that's out there.
Yeah. Last thing on this, and then we'll throw it back. Has that weight for you stayed steady? Has it gotten heavier with time, and not heavy in a bad way, but have you felt more of that solemnness and a great burden as you go on?
I think it increases every day for me, because the more I study and learn who God is, the more real it becomes for me. And so it is the most rewarding thing. I mean, I wouldn't trade it for anything in the world, but it is, I mean, it's something I take very seriously. And it's again, the more I study Scripture, the more I begin to try to wrap my head around an infinite God in which every man is held accountable to, the more real it becomes to me. And not only that, but the more my burden becomes for the people. I mean, I truly desire to preach like a dying man to a dying world. That's.
How do you put that in perspective for people who think like the culture would say, man, the highest movement of man is to find himself playing in a professional sport, right? Like, well, that's what we pay those guys the most. Yep. But then you make a transition from playing at a very high profile professional sport to moving back to Ainer, South Carolina, doing questionably, it's not to the culture would question, but for us it's unquestionably something more important in the scope of life, right? So speak into that. Like, what has that transition been like to go from playing in the NFL to small town like Ainer? Some people who watch this are like, Ainer, like, what in the world what are they talking about?
They mention that a lot.
Talking about Ainer.
I am again, even with just kind of the way this whole thing came about in God's providence, I'm extremely grateful that I had the opportunity to go and do things like the NFL, which, set me up in a lot of ways, financially and some other things that a lot of people my age struggle with. But there's an element in which I have a comfort starting out with some things that my heart and everything that I have is focused on my preaching ministry and exalting God in everything that I do. Because certain things that are tempting for other people my age, they want to go out, see the world. I've been able to do a lot of that stuff, and now for me, it's like God let me get through some of that stuff to now I've got a one-track mind on what I'm doing.
I'm gonna ask you this question.
Yeah.
So you're 24, and you're kind of at that cusp of like you just got out of college with UNC. You're out, and you're like, is it time to go see the world, or is it time to find something meaningful to do? Like, because I'm speaking to, like, we're 20 years difference in age, and that's like at a different phase of life. So how does that hit you as a 24-year-old?
Scott, you're getting pretty old, man.
Right. Listen,
I didn't say that, by the way.
So, yes, I am old.
I think it's interesting because as someone who identifies as an old soul, I have a really unique perspective because I am 24. And it's fascinating for me. It always was to go through college and really high school, college, and see the way that other kids my age, and I guess kind of not desires, but like the ideal of what is like the highest level of life. And I think happiness is kind of what it's summed up. No one can find happiness, but I think everybody wants to find it. So you talk about traveling. You talk about, what's going to make me the happiest today. To me, that's the hardest challenge, is being able to be rooted in a culture that tells me I should be chasing my own happiness. I should be chasing every day when I wake up, how can I be the happiest? How can I have a great day? How can I, and it just doesn't add up to and that's the happiness versus joy that we always talk about. Yeah. But I really do believe it gets summed up in that idea of this is happiness and this is joy. And my culture does not chase joy. We don't know how to chase joy because we haven't been told how to chase joy.
Is joy relevant to culture today?
I don't think so. I don't think, well, it's interesting. I'm not sure there's an overlap right now. I'm not sure my culture at 24 even knows to chase this deep-rooted joy and contentment. Maybe that's the better word, contentment. I don't think we know how to chase contentment because we're so busy chasing happiness. And so when you ask that question, it's a challenge because I'm knowing that I have to chase something that might not always make me this external happy, but I know it's giving me deep-rooted joy. And I think as you hear me talk through it, kind of almost jumbled, it might make sense to say it is a struggle. Even for somebody who feels I'm incredibly rooted in God's word, I'm incredibly rooted in a great community, it's still a challenge. I still can't kind of find the words to say, man, this is what the culture wants me to chase after versus what I want. It's a challenge.
Have you ever read the book Along Obedience in the Same Direction?
I have.
Yeah, what I think about that is, so it seems like culture today is so like disjointed in finding happiness. It's just kind of the next shiny object. But like what TJ is saying, like when you find something that you're willing to be obedient over the long haul, like that's like, all right, I'll do that for the long haul, and that's what derives out of that is a joy.
And I think too that it's like Paul said, it's learning to be content no matter what the circumstance. Well, if you're in God's will, right, and even when you talk about joy in general, right, joy is a fruit of the Spirit. You can't get that outside, right? That's something that only comes from God. Yeah. So true joy is something that can only come, and that's the difference in cultural's perception of happiness, which they're chasing things of the carnal flesh versus finding true joy in the Spirit of God.
Yeah.
There's a consistency element that I want to bring into this. I don't want to bring up the streak and the consistency level, but we were talking about that, and I think it's very difficult, and it's a challenge for my generation, whatever you want to call it, to be consistent and to be faithful. Put in whatever word you want to use there. There is something to be said about that because consistency, in my mind, leads to, I don't want to say joy because that's broad, but I think if you can be consistent
in the right things,
you will find joy. You're not necessarily chasing joy, but sometimes you're chasing that consistency. Yeah. Curious about thoughts on that.
Yeah, I would say if you depend on which kind of way you translate, the long suffering perseverance. I mean, long suffering is kind of a word that's not used a lot.
King Jimmy.
Yeah, well, King Jimmy. The long suffering, the perseverance that
Okay, sure.
that is a part of that. And we were, when we were prepping the show, that was something that we kept keying in on, was like something, how much has perseverance, you think, played into your, that was a trademark of your career, was perseverance. Starts like, well, okay, if you're starting 53 games, right?
Yeah.
Okay, all right, that's perseverance. That's long suffering. Like, that is long suffering. That's showing up. And I think it's good for people to hear, like, man, like, if you really want to find the essence of what God has designed for you to experience in life, how is that connected to perseverance from someone who, from where you've been and what you're doing right now?
Yeah, and I think that gets back to, it's kind of fresh on my mind because I just got through preaching through James, right?
Yeah.
But blessed is the man who endures through, trials and different things like that. It's people think there's a misconception that being a Christian, and this is taught largely in a lot of ways now, is that it's all, health, wealth, prosperity, right? Name it, claim it, it's yours.
Sure.
If you don't get it, you don't have. You don't have enough faith because you didn't get it. But kind of the opposite is true. It's a promise that the world is going to hate you as a Christian because they hated Christ.
And Jesus, I think Jesus said, they will hate you because you belong to me.
Yeah, but understanding that this whole idea of, and we'll start back in Genesis, right, with the image of God being given to man, right? Adam perverted that image that all of us had. When you profess Christ, that image is restored and it's being perfected until glorification, right? So we are being made in the image of Christ. That is part of the sanctification process. And a lot of times you talk about perseverance, when you have the framework and the mindset of understanding what is going on, that your faith is being made more complete, that you're being made more like Jesus Christ, what joy that truly brings us. And that's what I find my joy in. Even during times of trials. And that gets back to of my view of God and his sovereignty and sovereignly working these things together for his glory.
Yeah.
That is a perspective that culture needs to hear that it doesn't have.
Why do you think culture needs to hear that?
I think
it's a why question.
We've lost the level of what does it mean to be consistent. I don't think we know what it means to be consistent. And you could sum it up in the easy way of, they quit too easily. They, speaking of maybe the younger generation or culture. But it's consistency. It boils down to, and you just said, becoming more like Christ every single day. You can't do it without consistency.
Right.
But we've lost the idea of finding joy and happiness is the wrong word. Joy and contentment in just being consistent, being faithful, showing up and doing it.
Yeah,
I think we've lost it.
Well, yeah, I mean, we could do a whole episode on like consistency, especially around the spiritual disciplines, like just being consistent with the spiritual disciplines. There's no shortcuts.
Right.
There is no shortcuts to this. It's just showing up and being found faithful.
Yeah.
It's, for me, I keep coming back
100%.
to that. It's like, I just want to be found faithful. I want, as a daddy, I want to be, as a husband. Like this week I'm preaching, and we're talking about sexuality. We're talking about, being found faithful in monogamy and being found faithful in celibacy and singlehood. Like just God's design for, like, what is the Imago Dei? Like, how we walk that out, just being found faithful.
Yeah.
And faithful is basic. Trust is presence over time as an equation. Faithfulness is the numerator and frequency is the denominator. Like, how do you judge faithfulness? By how long you've done it.
Sure.
Right? So to be found faithful, well, I was faithful once. Okay, no, he's been faithful every time. So when you run that over the long haul, like, that's the essence that Scripture teaches. I think culture is missing on, like, I just want to be great. No, I want to be faithful.
Sure. We only got about 5 minutes left, so I want to hand it back to you. But the one thing that comes to my mind is, like, faithfulness is not flashy. In a culture that chases flash, faithfulness is not flashy, yet it's probably the highest calling that we have.
Well, and I'm glad you said that, because TJ said something like, some of the greatest players in the NFL are dudes you will never know their name. Well, I say never know their name. The media won't herald their name, right? They're not the media darling or the nemesis that we're, quote, supposed to hate, right? Like that, you got to have that in a narrative. So that's what I love bringing you in. You're an offensive lineman, a dude in the trenches.
Nobody.
Just a dude in the trenches who
7th-round pick.
7th-round pick.
Skin of his teeth.
From Aner.
Aner.
Yeah, I always joke about this. Whenever Nathaniel asked, like, what good can come out of Nazareth? Like, they ask, hey, you got to come see this Jesus guy. They're like, bro, like, what good can come out of Nazareth? I always joke and say, bro, what good can come out of Aner? Out of Aner. But TJ, you're a good dude, and I respect you as a man, as a father, as a husband. But because of the fidelity to God's word and just being faithful for showing up, right? And for that, I think that needs to be applauded, and in the way that is in a healthy way, and when I say applauded, I mean like, we want dudes to watch this. Man, what should I be doing in my life? Well, be found faithful. Show up.
Yeah, and that's the only thing that matters to me in my life. I just want to be faithful.
Yeah.
I mean, if I could sum it all up to that, I just want to be faithful.
I don't even want to be successful.
No.
I want to be faithful. No. I think it seems like that's a word for culture today. Is like, would you rather chase success or faithfulness?
Yeah, and we got to define what success looks like.
100%.
Right. Yeah. Isn't faithfulness success? Right. In the roundabout way. I don't know.
Depends on who's asking the question, right? Right.
We could get some of the stuff we've brought up here. You can get into a lot of stuff with.
Yeah, we've had a couple of podcast episodes emerge from this last hour, but I mean, captivating and truly as somebody who's just sitting here listening, and I hope that, and that's the goal of what we're doing, is just sit and learn and soak it in, and I certainly have done that. It's a neat perspective.
Yeah. All right, so TJ, we're gonna give you the parting word, man. Like this, let me set this up for you. Like, man, what do you want? People they watch this podcast, and if they make it to the end, good on them. What do you want? What do you want to leave with the guys? People who watch this are people all over, but most of them are a dude who's kind of right in the middle of his life, and he's trying to figure out, like, man, what does the good life look like, and what I need some wisdom for my life. So what do you wish, outside of everything you've said, that you want a man to hang his hat on?
Was some wisdom for somebody going through kind of that middle?
Yeah. Our average guy who watch, we were talking about this before the show. Our average, we know the demographics of guys who watch our show, and everything we do with Corbin Collective. He's 35 years old. He's been around church, probably left church a little bit. Then he got married, had some kids, and then went, oh man, I probably should be back. I got kids now, so I'm like, and I preach to that guy. You see that guy at church who's like, all right, I gotta get my house in order.
Yeah,
I gotta get my. I got a wife and kids, and that's who our demographic typically is. That guy.
Yeah. Well, and there is so much that we brought up today that I would love to spend some time elaborating on. But again, I think once you understand who God is, it does shape everything about you. And so for me, I desire to learn as much as I can about the Holy God. And in doing that, I think that the framework for me is when it clicks for me that a holy, eternal, existent God, right, has revealed himself to man in a book. Right, through prophets, we know the whole way canon was formed. And he's revealed how to know him. You want to know what God's will is for you in your life. You're in those things. It is given to us, and it's sufficient, right? And you're not going to get it outside of that. There's no new revelation. You want to know what God's will for you in your life is, learn the Word.
Yeah, I love that, and I echo that. I know a lot of dudes who are looking for, I heard this, a fresh word.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah? Can I just get a fresh word? I'm like, well, read the word. And the word is always fresh because it's the living word of God, and it is God's.
And it's sufficient, right? That's a whole nother podcast episode too, right? That we've got that you think that we've got, God's word's not sufficient, so let's turn and get it from here, or this fresh word. You're saying that God's word, the way He chose to reveal Himself, is not sufficient.
Yeah.
Don't get me started on that one.
Yeah, I love it. I love it, man. I appreciate you, dude. I appreciate you come on and being here and sharing your story with our guests. So I'm gonna let Joe take us out, man.
Well, it was a lot of fun. Maybe we can talk about how to eat 12,000 calories in a day. You know, kind of write it down. It'll be a lot of fun. TJ, thank you so much. TJ
Thank you
Johnson.
guys for having me.
Absolutely, Scott. Thanks so much for listening to Rugged Wisdom.